Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. For any of you who have not watched The Acolyte, congratulations! Trust me, be thankful that you haven't. But for any of you who have watched it, especially any of you who are essentially forcing yourselves to watch it like I am, please remember I'm only doing so to review it. No other reason. So if you do watch it, you do so at your own risk. Because guess what, folks? The most recently released episode, Episode 7, which premiered on July 9th on Disney+, is essentially a rehash of Episode 3.
Oh, goody, goody! Oh, goody, goody, gumdrop!
That's right, folks. It's more fun-filled moments with your favorite lesbian space witches, just as I had predicted it would have in my previous review video for Episode 6.
Power 1. Power 2. The power of many.
So anyone who watched Episode 3 gets to once again watch many of the same exact scenes in Episode 7, but often from different camera angles.
Oh, goody, goody! Oh, goody, goody, gumdrop!
And there are some additional Jedi filler scenes to help explain why the Jedi were on Brendok in the first place, and what transpired from their perspective. But at least there's no replay of the awful lesbian space witches chant from Episode 3, since the Jedi weren't there to witness that.
How disappointing.
But before proceeding, I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please share the video on social media, please subscribe to support this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! So for anyone who may not remember what happened in Episode 3, it's a flashback that occurs 16 years before the events shown in the show's first 2 episodes, as I had talked about in a video that I had released at the time. And the 3rd episode focuses on younger versions of the twins Osha and May, as played by the twin sister actresses Lauren and Leia Brady, respectively. And the Episode 3 flashback is essentially told from the girl's point of view. But unlike her sister May, who is totally committed to the lesbian space witches and their 2 mothers, named Mother Anastasia, as played by Jodie Turner-Smith,
Yes.
who leads the lesbian space witches, and Mother Coral, as played by Margarita LaViva, who's a stock angry female warrior character, the young Osha wants to leave the planet of Brendok and have a life of her own. So Osha periodically leaves the safety and concealment offered by the lesbian space witch's fortress to wander around outside, and she doesn't want to go through the lesbian space witch's rite of ascension, even though May tries to convince Osha to go through with it. And reluctantly, Osha eventually agrees. But unbeknownst to them, Jedi Master Soul, as played by Jung-jae, unexpectedly discovers the twins and then sees Mother Coral find them and quickly take them back to the lesbian space witch's fortress. And after getting a force push demo from Mother Anastasia, who also has a chat with them in their bedroom, Osha and May get ready for the Rite of Ascension ceremony, which is when the audience is treated to that awful chant.
Power 1. Power 2. The power of many.
May then undergoes the Rite of Ascension, but before Osha can, the Jedi show up under the command of Jedi Master Indara, as played by Carrie-Anne Moss, as well as Soul, Indara's Padawan Smelly Torben, as played by actor Dean Charles Chapman, and Jedi Master Kelnaka, as played by actor Junis Suotamo. Indara insists on seeing the children, and Osha willingly steps out from behind the lesbian space witches who were attempting to conceal them. Soul approaches Osha, then kneels and hands his lightsaber to her, but May only reluctantly steps out and doesn't really want to talk to the Jedi. Then Mother Anastasia reluctantly agrees to let the children be tested by the Jedi, which occurs the following day at the Jedi's ship. May's test isn't shown, but during Osha's testing, she stops lying during the test and says that she wants to become a Jedi. Then back at the lesbian space witch's fortress, Osha talks with Mother Anacia after May is dragged away kicking and screaming by Mother Coral, and Osha tells Anacia that she wants to become a Jedi. And her mother says that she needs to discuss it with the others. Then back in the girls' room, May tries to talk Osha out of leaving and threatens to kill her, and instead appears to start a fire just outside of the door to their bedroom that May had locked in an effort to keep Osha from leaving. But as the fire engulfs the door, Osha figures out a way to escape the room through a narrow ventilation shaft, and she later encounters Sol, who's looking for her. Then, on a catwalk bridge that's collapsing, May seemingly falls to her death, while Sol is able to save Osha, and she escapes with the Jedi, with Sol later telling her on board the Jedi ship that May had started the fire and that everyone was killed. Well, folks, naturally, anyone who suffered through Episode 3 knows that it didn't actually contain the entire story. And even though I accurately predicted that the lesbian space witches would be back in Episode 7, I had no idea that it was going to mostly be a rehash of what I just described from Episode 3. Episode 7 tells the exact same story, but from the Jedi's perspective, so it includes additional filler scenes with the Jedi showing them conducting an investigation on Brendok, as well as talking amongst themselves. It kind of sounds like a derivative of the 2002 Chinese movie Hero starring Jet Li, doesn't it? Harvey Weinstein's former personal assistant, Leslie Headland, is just oozing with derivative ideas, and that's not the only one in this episode. Thus, what's new in Episode 7 as compared with Episode 3 is seeing the 4 Jedi on Brendok studying its flora, because apparently the entire system had been rendered lifeless by a hyperspace accident some 100 years earlier. And that's apparently a reference to a plot point in the High Republic novels that hardly anyone has ever read. I'm just hoping that it wasn't a plug for what Headland wants to do next. But later that evening, the 4 of them are seated around a campfire and talking about Kel Naka's cooking, because he apparently really loves to cook, just like Chewbacca's wife Mala, who is shown cooking at the start of the 1978 made-for-TV movie, The Star Wars Holiday Special, which is truly awful but rated higher on Rotten Tomatoes than The Acolyte. And she was getting cooking tips from Chef Gormanda, as played by the late comedic actor Harvey Korman. But then, as Smelly Torben starts bemoaning why they're on Brendok, and that he would rather return to Coruscant, Sol speaks up and says, "We are looking for a virgins." The first time that most had ever heard that term used in Star Wars is during Star Wars I: The Phantom Menace, when Qui-Gon Jinn, as played by Liam Neeson, tells the Jedi Council upon returning from the planet Naboo via a stop at Tatooine that he had encountered a virgins centered around the boy named Anakin Skywalker, as played by Jake Lloyd. But in this episode, Smelly Torben asks, "What's a virgins?" Indara answers, saying, "A concentration of force energy centered around a location." Now, what's truly funny about this entire dialogue is that Smelly Torben was apparently never told why they're on Brendok, so he's taking measurements and has no idea why. You'd think that would have been explained to him ahead of time, but apparently not. Just more bad writing from Leslie Headland. But then Sol continues with a brief exposition saying, "A virgins could create life like what we see on this planet. It's a power that should be studied, protected. Nothing could be more important to the Jedi. This is a noble mission." The next day, when Indara tells them to split up their search, Sol rides a speeder bike to a different area, and that's where he spots Osha and May under the yellow-leafed bunta tree. He then spies on them, as was briefly shown in Episode 3, and when they leave with Mother Coral, he notifies Indara via his communicator, and then he follows them to the lesbian space witch's fortress, where he sees Mother Coral and the girls disappear into an elevator at the base of the fortress. Unable to gain entry, Sol then climbs up the steep sides of the fortress, as was shown briefly in the March teaser, though I had previously thought that it was a woman. Then after he gains surreptitious entry into the fortress, he spies on the internal activities occurring before leaving the same way that he got in, and then reporting his findings back to Indara, who initially calls it a force cult, saying, "A force cult? Here?" To which Sol replies, "I think they are witches." Smelly Torben asks, "Night Sisters?" To which Indara replies, "We do not have all the information. Besides, Night Sisters don't raise younglings, let alone train them." Sol then says, "They don't treat the girls like children." But Indara says, "We should return to the ship, ask the council for guidance." Now just FYI, of these 4 Jedi, Indara, who's the only female in the group, is written to be the smartest, while the men were written to look stupid and easily corrupted. And that's obviously by the design of showrunner Leslie Headland, who's pushing the woke identity politics message that women are stronger and smarter than men, which you're about to see with the rest of what happens in this episode's repeat flashback scenes that weren't included in episode 3. Sol says, "I fear for the girls' safety. The witches prepare for a ceremony tonight. What if the girls are in danger?" Now, at this stage, I don't know why Sol would feel that way given that they know next to nothing about the witches or their intent. So I personally believe that this is Leslie Headland in her ongoing efforts to make the Jedi look as corrupt and misleading as possible, using the character of Sol to place his own personal interests ahead of the common good. Now, if you watched my previous review video about episode 6, then you'll know that I showed how Leslie Headland may have very easily conflated not only the Jedi Order with her parents' church and their beliefs, but also the dark side of the Force with her own lesbian sexuality, which clearly went against her parents and their beliefs, as she herself said during a 2021 interview with the AV Club, when she described their home as being very religious and heteronormative. And I'm bringing that up now because of what is shown in episode 7 that wasn't shared in episode 3. Sol then says, "Indara, I know you would defer to the council, but I insist." Unfortunately, Sol persuades Indara to go see the lesbian space witches for herself. Indara initially wants to go alone to not intimidate them, but Sol insists that they go together, saying that there are 50 of them along with the 2 children. So all 4 of them go together in spite of Indara's concerns. And as I said earlier, Leslie Headland really wants to make the male Jedi look bad. So the 4 Jedi then travel to the lesbian space witch's fortress, and Kelnaka is able to override the controls for the elevator so that they can more easily go up into it, and all the while Indara is not convinced that they're doing the right thing. And about the only thing that's really different during the Jedi visit to the lesbian space witches in episode 7 as compared with episode 3 at this point in the story is seeing what Mother Anastasia was doing after she essentially entered into Smelly Torben's mind and had effectively gained control over him. Then after the Jedi return back to their ship, Sol tells Indara that he feels that Osha is meant to be his Padawan, while Indara says that she's too old to join the Order, and that she's convinced that the lesbian space witches would never allow Osha to leave. And this is very contradictory to what Indara told Mother Anastasia about the Jedi having the right to test children, and Mother Anastasia agreeing to let them be tested. If they're too old to join the Jedi Order, why bother testing them in the first place? This is just another prime example of how bad Leslie Headland's writing actually is. Indara then says to Sol, "They are so insular, so strange." To which Sol replies, "They marked her sister with dark magic." And I think it was due to how Lee Jung-jae delivered that line that it reminded me of when Severus Snape, as played by the late actor Alan Rickman, confiscates the Marauder's map from Harry in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban and says to Professor Lupin, "This parchment is clearly full of dark magic." And when Leslie Headland uses terminology like dark magic in the Acolyte, it just feels that much more derivative by borrowing from fantasy franchises like J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter universe. Further, Headland having Sol focus on May being marked is not only potentially culturally insensitive, because again, Headland wants to paint male characters in the worst possible light, it's also reminiscent of Hagrid, as played by the late Robbie Coltrane in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, when he says to Harry, "That ain't no ordinary cut on your forehead. A mark like that only comes from being touched by a curse, and an evil curse at that." It's also reminiscent of the mark of the beast mentioned in Revelations chapter 13 in the Bible, which again may be another reference to her parents' very religious beliefs. Indara's response is, ceremonial markings are customary in many cultures in the galaxy. So Headland definitely wanted to bring up the issue of cultural insensitivity. But Sol replies, but Osha did not have one. I worry that she's not safe. To which Indara replies, that's true. She may have resisted being marked. There's no way to know. And Sol says, then who is protecting this child if not the Jedi? Headland has Sol become obsessed with Osha, which makes no logical sense coming from a Jedi because it's very un-Jedi-like. He's impatient about taking action without consulting with the Jedi Council, and he's presumptuous in his concerns that the girls, especially Osha, may be in danger. So it's very clear that Headland is pointing the finger of blame at Sol, which will be a lot more evident later in the episode. Sol goes on to say, I believe she wants to leave with us. To which Indara says, do not confuse what Osha wants with what you want. So in this episode, Sol's patience, selflessness, and detachment, which are all supposed to be commonplace Jedi aspects, appear to be severely lacking in him as Headland has written him to be impatient, selfish, and prone to attachment. George Lucas would never have written a Jedi to be like that, but Disney has strayed very far from Lucas's original vision. And how well is Leslie Headland's increasingly flawed and corrupt vision of the Jedi Order going over with fans? That's simple to answer. It's not. It's being completely and totally rejected, and rightfully so, in my own opinion. Leslie Headland's vision of a very corrupt and flawed Jedi Order is specifically how she wants to envision them, and it's how she wants everyone else to envision them too, because as I have theorized from her public interview statements, I believe that she hates religion, and that's what the Jedi represent in the Star Wars universe. And I'm not saying outright that she hates religion, but that's my personal interpretation of what she's doing in this series along with her sexuality. So in this episode, they show May's Jedi test, and the episode eventually goes to why the Jedi are suddenly at the lesbian space witch's fortress shortly before the fire erupts, and it paints a very different picture, again, to further portray the Jedi Order in the worst possible light. Smelly Torben and Sol rush to the lesbian space witch's fortress, and after climbing up the wall, they encounter Mother Anacia and Mother Coral, who says to them, "It was foolish to come back here, Jedi." And prior to their arrival, Mother Coral had ordered May, when she had dragged May away kicking and screaming, to stop Osha from leaving. Then the episode shows May standing outside of the door to the bedroom that she shares with Osha and starting the fire, which May then attempts to stomp out with her foot, but it quickly spreads, but rather than try to let Osha out, she runs off asking for help. Back to Sol and Smelly Torben, Sol says, "We come with noble intentions." To which Mother Anacia says, "You wish to know if we will allow Osha to join you, to be raised by an institution instead of a family." This was one of the most interesting lines to me in this episode because to me, it again harkens back to what Leslie Headland talked about in the 2021 interview with the AV Club, in which she described her parents' home as being very religious and heteronormative. From her 2021 AV Club interview, quote, "I literally was behind two mothers with their children at the airport and I was crying. It is so unusual to see it. And as someone that was raised very religiously and very heteronormatively, I mean, I could almost get emotional talking about it now," unquote. Just take the last part of what Mother Anacia said and insert the word religious in front of institution, and here's what you get. Quote, "To be raised by a religious institution instead of a family," unquote. Leslie Headland doesn't talk about her childhood much because, chances are, it was probably an unpleasant experience for her because, in all likelihood, her parents and her parents' church, a religious institution, were attempting to impose their very heteronormative-based rules on her and her life. Back in episode 7, Sol then asks, "The twins, where did they come from? How were they created?" Mother Anacia doesn't tell him, but instead says, "Someday those noble intentions you all have will destroy every Jedi in the galaxy." Now, whether that was supposed to be a prognostication or a curse isn't clear, but Mother Anastasia then turns herself into black smoke, which startles Sol as he turns his lightsaber on and inadvertently kills Mother Anastasia. And when Mother Anastasia turns herself into black smoke, it was essentially the same looking thing as when Ezra Miller's character of Credence Barebone in the Fantastic Beasts movies turns into an Obscurial. So again, very derivative, but Sol becomes the source of all of the problems within this series because May sees him kill her mother, and May undoubtedly blames him for herself starting the fire. But it isn't the fire that apparently kills the lesbian space witches if they're actually dead. In an effort to stave off the Jedi, a large contingent of the lesbian space witches start chanting in order to take over one of the Jedi's minds, and they take over Kel Naka's mind, who then starts to fight Sol and Smelly Torben. They don't want to hurt Kel Naka, but it's only when Indara comes along because only a strong woman can save Kel Naka. She overpowers him and breaks the lesbian space witch's spell on him, which seemingly either knocked them all out or killed them. It's hard to tell in the episode, and I won't be surprised if in episode 8, the final episode of this absolutely awful series, if some of the lesbian space witches actually survived, because the 4 Jedi leave with Osha. And while on board the Jedi ship, Sol wants to explain everything to the Jedi Council, and Indara says, "We will tell the Council the truth. May burned down the witch's fortress and everyone was lost." So even though Indara was the more patient one, she's ultimately just as corrupted by the Jedi institution as everyone else, which is how Leslie Hadland wants the Jedi to be viewed. And that's essentially the end of Episode 7 as Osha awakens on board the Jedi ship. And in conclusion, I can only say that I was quite happy when this episode ended, and I will be even happier when Episode 8 ends next week, because I won't have any more episodes to watch after that. Very few people are watching the Acolyte series, as I'm going to be talking about very soon in an upcoming video. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.